In the spring of 1918, WW1 was in its fourth year, and there was a stalemate in the trenches of northern France. There have been rumors among the British ranks of an imminent German. Each company of soldiers is required to spend 6 days of every month on the front line. It has yet to be determined which men will be there when the attack comes. On Monday, the 18th of March, a group of British soldiers are going about their day in the house of one of the civilians. Looking at the time, the commanding officer lets the others know it's time, prompting them to head out. Saying their goodbyes to their host and her children, the soldiers set out. Captain Stanhope is the last to step out of the house, who stands in front of his men and marches them out. In the British Army depot in France, the young officer James steps out of the truck that brought him there and begins to look around the large camp, taking in the sight of hundreds of soldiers and tents set up. After asking for directions to the general's quarters, he heads over and asks one of the soldiers to tell the general that his nephew is there. Once he is granted an audience, James tells his uncle that an old friend was out there and asks to be posted in his battalion by the name of Captain Stanhope. Although his uncle warns him that the regiment is dangerous, James is determined to join regardless, convincing his uncle of his plan. Out in the trenches, Captain Stanhope's battalion arrives just as the others are leaving, giving away their spots to the next group with relief. As they settle in, Stanhope orders his men to make as many renovations as they can to the trench that seems to be falling apart. Seeing the conditions of the place and the provisions left for them, the men begin to realize that they won't last a day if the Germans attack. After getting permission from his uncle, James and a few other men are driven down to the trenches to unite with Stanhope's battalion. As he arrives, James meets the kind-hearted Lieutenant Osborne, who offers him a drink and introduces himself. After they exchange pleasantries, James mentions that he knew the captain, telling Osborne that Stanhope used to stay with his family during the holidays. Seeming a bit apprehensive, Osborne mentions that Stanhope has changed quite a bit due to everything he has experienced in the war. During their conversation, they are interrupted by the battalion cook, Mason, who informs them of their meals for the night. A few minutes later, James goes to the other room to unpack and hears Stanhope barge into the cabin, cursing the previous officer for how he had left the place and yelling at Mason to bring alcohol. Before he can continue on his rant, James appears and greets Stanhope, who stands there in shock. Embarrassed by his actions and holding his tongue, Stanhope invited James to sit, waving away the whiskey Mason had brought him. As they sat down for their meals, James continued to notice Stanhope's difference in behavior. After the soups are served, Stanhope angrily orders the kitchen boy to fetch some paper from the other cabin. Fearing for his life against the German snipers, the boy stays low, as shots fired from the enemy lines almost hit his head, but manages to get through. After their meal, Stanhope orders James to follow another commanding officer by the name of Troyer, so he can learn some things, giving him the quality time he needs to drink. When he sees Stanhope getting drunk, Osborne tells him that he and James were in school together. Seeming sad, Stanhope shows Osborne a picture of James's sister, who was waiting for him back home. He then shares his fear that James will tell her that he has become a drunk who smelled of whiskey all day. Assuring him that he would not, Osborne carries the drunken man to bed and tucks him in. As soon as Stanhope passes out, he is plagued with nightmares of war. When James returns from his tour of the trenches, he takes a look at the drunken Stanhope and feels sorry for him. On Tuesday, the 19th of March, Stanhope wakes up with a hangover and heads out into the trenches to check on his men. While making his rounds, Stanhope is informed that his commanding officer wishes to speak to him and is forced to head out of the trenches. When he arrives at the working base, Stanhope is informed by his commander that the attacks will be arriving by the 21st, mentioning that he had received information from a German deserter. The commander explains that they will not be receiving reinforcement and that Stanhope is to remain on the front lines to slow the Germans down. Shocked and disappointed by the news, Stanhope returns to the trenches where James had taken over command until Stanhope's return. After his shift, James goes back to his cabin to have his breakfast and confides in Osborne that even though he is new, he feels like he has been there a long time. After their brief conversation, James goes inside to write a letter to his sister. When he returns to the trenches, Stanhope informs Trotter and Osborne of his orders, informing them of the day of the attack. Asking for his drink, Stanhope grabs his bottles and begins to bender early. Coming out of the inside room, James asks Osborne where they put the letters so he is able to send them, but Stanhope tells him to leave it open, telling the young man that it was his duty to censor all letters. Although James refuses at first, explaining to the captain that it is private, Stanhope forcefully takes it from him. When James leaves, Osborne chastises Stanhope for what he had done, but Stanhope makes Osborne read the letter, embarrassed when he realizes James has only good things to say about him. The following morning, Stanhope visited the commander of the whole battalion, who ordered him to send 2 officers and 10 men on a raid across the deadly place known as No Man's Land to gain intelligence for the brigadier who would be visiting for dinner the following night. Although Stanhope expresses his opposition to sending his men out there, his commander sternly explains that he has no other choice and asks him to make his choice of officers. When he offers him himself, the commander refuses and tells him to pick someone else as his men need him. Angry at the commander's decision, Stanhope returns to the cabin and finds one of the officers, Hibbert, ready to go home, explaining that he can no longer take the sickness. When Stanhope refuses to let him go, Hibbert tries to fight his way out to freedom but is stopped when Stanhope pulls out his gun. Hoping to be killed there, Hibbert embraces the coming death, but Stanhope refuses to shoot him, making Hibbert break down in tears, confessing that he is too frightened to go out into the trenches. Once he has calmed Hibbert down, Stanhope heads out to inform Osborne that he and James will be leading the raid the following day. That night, Stanhope reports to the commander of his choice and explains that James found it exciting. His lack of experience makes him naive. Stanhope tries one more time to change the mind of his commander, telling him that everyone they send out will be killed by German machine guns, and suggests they wait until dark to send a surprise raid, but the commander refuses, telling him that they must go along with the plan. That afternoon, Osborne and James get a farewell from the commander, wishing them luck on their mission. While getting ready, Osborne informs James of the plan, explaining that they need to do their best to go about it quickly, so it's over in under 3 minutes, and they're able to capture the first German. They see Osborne does his best to calm the nervous James by telling him stories about his childhood, taking the frightening aspect of the mission off his mind. When the time had come, the men moved out and crawled their way out into the trenches, into no man's land. As the others begin to drop bombs on enemy lines as a distraction, Osborne and his men rush toward the other line to execute their mission. During their journey, James watches as some of his men are gunned down and feels the fear overwhelming his body. The group finally arrives at the other line and manages to kidnap one of the Germans and begin to drag him back to their trench. Although James and 4 other men along with the prisoner make it back alive, Osborne dies in action. Both Stanhope and James are devastated by Osborne's death, and an air of sadness fills the entire battalion. After the frightening experience he had, James begins to associate with the other men, smoking and eating with them as a group. In the cabin, Stanhope asks for his drink and is informed by Mason that it is the last bottle. Despite feeling upset, Stanhope uncorks the alcohol and starts drinking it rapidly. As the alcohol takes effect, Stanhope becomes unable to tolerate Hibbert's conversation about his past experiences with women and angrily orders him to leave. This creates a solemn atmosphere among the others as Stanhope abruptly stops the music and plunges the entire place into silence. He then insults the remaining men, chastising them for tolerating Hibbert and his perverted mind. With Osborne dead, Stanhope informs Trotter that he is now his second in command. Telling him that he wouldn't let him down, Trotter goes out to relieve James so he can have his dinner. When James arrives, Stanhope angrily chastises him for keeping them waiting during dinner and tells him that they have kept it warm for him. When James refuses to eat, Stanhope's anger flares and he tells him that the men didn't want an officer warming up to them, but James disagrees. Feeling disrespected, Stanhope asks James to sit down despite the young man's reluctance to do so. When James refuses to eat his dinner, Stanhope begins to yell at him, mentioning that he is not the only man who cares about Osborne, and breaks down crying. When James tries to console him, Stanhope kicks him away, unwilling to bear the pity he feels for the younger man. Staggering to his bed, Stanhope covers his face with his hands and begins to weep uncontrollably, feeling like he is all alone. On Thursday, 21st of March, the battalion wakes up early to get ready for the impending attack. While having their breakfast, Trotter and Stanhope begin to hear explosions close by. As the others vacate the cabin, Stanhope goes to check on Hibbert, who is frightened to death, and offers him his drink to give him courage. Once all the soldiers are standing on alert outside, the officers go around giving them courage and patting them on the back. For a few minutes, the place is dead. Quite then, suddenly, bombs begin to drop all around them, creating chaos and mayhem. As the frightening events unfold, soldiers begin to scream at one another, rushing to help their injured friends. The soldiers huddle together as the earth shakes violently from the relentless bombardment. The stench of explosives fills the air, mingling with the metallic tang of fear. Mud-caked uniforms and weary faces betray the soldiers' exhaustion as they cling to their rifles, their eyes reflecting a mix of determination and fear. Shouts and cries are drowned out by the deafening roar of exploding shells. Each explosion sends showers of dirt and debris raining down, adding to the sense of chaos and impending doom. In the midst of the fierce battle, James suffers severe injuries and is brought down to the dugout by Stanhope. Trembling with pain, he expresses regret about being confined to the dugout while the battle rages on. Despite his pain, James pleads with Stanhope to stay with him. After a few moments, James quietly succumbs to his wounds and peacefully departs this world. In the the aftermath of the relentless assault, Stanhope is called upon, and before he can fully process the situation, he is abruptly struck down by a barrage of artillery fire while attempting to climb up the stairs. Astonishingly, he gets up unharmed and goes up to the trenches, only to witness a devastating scene. His men, who had valiantly held their ground, have been mercilessly decimated by the continuous onslaught of German artillery shells. The sight leaves Stanhope filled with a profound sense of grief and sorrow as he looks upon the devastating impact of the enemy's relentless firepower. Meanwhile, in the comfort of her home, Margaret anxiously awaits news from her brother. Finally, a letter arrives, penned by James shortly after his deployment to the front lines. In the letter, he passionately praises the remarkable leadership qualities of Stanhope, recounting the awe-inspiring reputation he has earned amongst their comrades. James's words paint a vivid picture of Stanhope as a courageous and respected figure, someone who commands the utmost respect from those who serve alongside him. Margaret's heart swells with a mix of pride and concern for her brother, knowing that he is under the guidance and protection of such a man. As the dust settles, a chilling sight unfolds before the eyes of the Germans. They gaze upon the conquered trenches, their faces concealed by gas masks. The once chaotic battleground now lies eerily silent, its atmosphere accentuated by the lifeless bodies of fallen British soldiers scattered across the grim landscape. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.